Today, the National Transportation Safety Board opened its docket and released approximately 2,000 pages of documents regarding the Amtrak derailment. Nowhere is there any justification for Brandon Bastian's reckless decision to accelerate to 106 miles per hour in a curve. Perhaps even more importantly, as we reviewed this information today, Brandon Bastian told the National Transportation Safety Board on May 15, 2015, that he had, I remember passing the platforms in North Philadelphia. I remember turning on the bell, and the next thing that I remember is when I came to my senses, I was standing up in the locomotive cab after the accident. On November 10, 2015, Brandon Bastian was asked about the same events and miraculously now had recollections of approaching the curve, taking actions, intentionally accelerating into the straightaway before the curve after North Philadelphia, taking actions to break it, and actually remembers the tip over. His change of testimony in this case is extraordinary. He told his attorneys, and this was reported, his attorney reported this back on May 14th and May 15th. He had no recollection of the incident, absolutely no recollection whatsoever of the events. Now, after months passed after the accident, he now has a sudden memory. That, for the victims of this derailment, is going to be a bitter pill to swallow. Let me turn it over to Tom.
Thank you all for coming. We immediately have zeroed in on the statements of Brandon Bastian, in particular the statements from May and from November. He was interviewed twice by the NTSB investigators. And while we certainly have our own questions which we would like to ask him and intend to ask him under oath, we can already tell from the statements that there are glaring inconsistencies with what he said his recollection was and what was represented to be his recollection immediately after the accident, with a very detailed report that he gives that boil down to a couple of basic elements. One, that he knew and he understood, and he indeed admits that he was accelerating towards that curve. While he puts his speed at going between 70 and 80, trying to, quote, get up to 80, we now know that he was going far, far in excess of that. And second, he also admits and describes in some detail his radio discussion with the SEPTA conductor engineer who was hit himself previously. There was a prior incident on the tracks. I have always believed, I've always thought that there was a tie between these two events. And while we do not yet have the NTSB's conclusions, one cannot help but tie the events together. We have someone who was operating a train volitionally. He admits consciousness, he admits knowledge of where he was, and he also admits that he knew that there was an incident which occurred previously known to him. I don't think that we can ignore all of those facts when coupled together. The headline, as Bob Mongaluzzi said, here is that there was no memory of the key person in this whole tragedy in May, days after the event. And then there is an elaborate description of what he remembers and doesn't remember, and mainly we have focused on what he says he recalls. And what he recalls is that he was operating the train, knowing where he was, So much for not knowing where he was speculation. And he went into that curve knowing what he was doing, but he sure wasn't going 70 to 80 miles an hour. We know that as well. That's what we've learned just by scratching the surface on about 2,000 documents which have been now put into the public domain for all of us to review more carefully. We've had the documents literally for a month. We've had the documents literally for an hour, and we are focusing our attention with the lawyers and paralegals in this room from our respective offices, looking to get to the bottom of it. We expect to find other things as well. Bob,
Yeah.
Bob may add.
Sure. What we have learned from the NTSB documents is that there was no problem with the signals, no problem with the tracks, no problem with the locomotive, no problem with the brakes. And what we've learned is the problem was Brandon Bastian. And the problem remains his changing story, which started with, I have no recollection whatsoever, and now becomes, I have memory of what occurred, but I mysteriously have a gap as well. So we have almost a dozen people here who are continuing to review the docket even as we speak, but we felt that this information is critical as we went through it, looked at the core documents. We have both been involved in NTSB cases before. We know how the file is set up, and so we targeted the areas where we thought we would have the most useful information. I believe that we have copies of Mr. Bastian's two statements, and I would urge you to review the statements that he made to his lawyer, and that his lawyer recounted on May 14th and May 15th, and determine how much they differ. Yes?
Obviously don't pretend to be a doctor or psychiatrist. We do hear often, though, about this notion of someone being interviewed about an incident that is a traumatic incident, which this obviously would fall in that category, in the hours, in this case a couple of days aftermath, and then as time goes on, the mind tends to sort of put into place what it didn't think it knew before and starts piecing things together. Is it possible he simply began piecing this together, or to, if not, to what do you ascribe the memory that he had months later but not days later?
Yeah, well,
We'll both.
Yeah, we're both going to, he was seen right after the crash, actually by Tom's client, and I think he could talk to you a little bit about it. And she noted that his demeanor was fine, that he displayed no evidence that he had a concussion, was dazed, or that he didn't know what he was doing. And we also know that he refused to answer questions to the police and asked for his lawyer. That is the hallmark of somebody whose wits are about him. So, no, we do not believe at all that he had a medical condition which mysteriously and somehow allowed memory to seep back into his head. We believe that his inconsistent story speaks volumes about him and his credibility and believability at trial.
The one fact that is a constant in this, in the both statements that were issued at two different points in time by Mr. Bastian in May and in November, is that he said that he was concerned for his own safety. He knew and understood that there had been a prior incident. And there are details, not in his statement, but in other documents that are contained within the now released information, which show that that was a significant and serious event that occurred with the SEPTA driver. Apparently, there was a rock or a projectile that was thrown through the windshield that actually injured that driver. And one of the things that Bastian said in his May statement, which is now clear to us and later becomes consistent actually in the